Hello and welcome to this edition of Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris. Thrilled that you guys are here today. I believe you're going to absolutely love our guest. Chris Cooper is our guest today on the podcast. And you may know Chris. There was a nasty incident in Central Park 5 years ago, which launched him into birding fame. And we'll talk about that incident. But more important, we'll talk about what happened after. Blackbirders Week was an outgrowth of that. An Emmy Award winning show and a New York Times bestselling novel. We're going to talk about Chris's passion, some might say obsession with Central Park, spring migration warblers. And then following this hour-long conversation with Chris, I'm going to do my regular field notes. I always say those field notes are about birds, animals, parks, or. Today is an or, and the or is James Bond. And you might have some fun seeing how I tie that in to our nature podcast, Naturally Scott. So let's get right to it. Let's start talking to Chris. I hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to this edition of Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris. My guest today, and I'm honored to have him on board, is Christian Cooper. And I have his permission to call him Chris, so don't think I'm being rude or too forward. But Chris and I have spoken a couple of times in the past. He's a guest in my book, Why We Love Birds, which again will be coming out not until spring of 27. I wish it was sooner, but that's what we get. And Chris was kind enough to be a guest in that and now be a guest on this podcast. And will actually be a guest coming up in the next couple of months on another podcast that we're doing with a panel with a couple of friends of Chris and newer friends of mine, Drew Lanham and Scott Edwards. So we're going to have some fun there. Chris is an Emmy Award winner and a New York Times bestselling author, which is kind of pretty cool no matter what area those come from. Those were launched from an incident that many of you are familiar with. You will either immediately know or you'll remember as soon as we talk about it, and we will talk about it. But before we do that, there's something very important that I need to discuss with Chris, which is I understand you got your great gray owl.
I did.
All right. So there's good news and bad news in that, by the way. Chris explained to me the odds of him finding that were very slim since he has a rule of not going below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Also, Chris had agreed to be in the first episode of a TV show I'm pitching on Nemesis birds, and we were going to go get him a great gray owl. So now we have to change that first episode and find another bird for Chris. But I'm excited for you that you found it. Slightly disappointed, but excited for you. And I got to tell you, after you found it, I probably had 3 or 4 people call me and say, "Did you hear Chris got the great gray?" So
really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That made rounds in the birding world when you got that great gray. So tell us about it, man, because I know you were excited about one day seeing one, and as recently as a month ago, you didn't know if you ever would. And so how did it come about? Where'd you get your great gray?
Sure. I was in Wyoming giving a talk, and, so I'm in the Grand Tetons, which is part of the greater Yellowstone area. And there is a small population of great grays that actually breeds in that area. Normally to see a great gray, you've got to brave the frigid weather and hope there's an eruption that pushes them down into the lower 48 and all of that, which was unlikely for me, considering I'm allergic to cold weather. I'm sure I would brave it at some point, somehow, but it just made a great gray very unlikely and in the distant future for me. But
are there not many of them in Manhattan?
So few, So here I was in Wyoming, and some friends and I were going to go birding, and one of them knows this researcher who works with great grays and in that area. So she knew, how they operate in the area. Now, our chances were still extraordinarily low because apparently it was a really bad year for their breeding. None of the nests were successful in the area.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. But that's how you find them is, if you know where they're nesting, even after the young have fledged, they kind of still hang out in more or less the same area. So, you can look there. Well, you couldn't do that this year. So it could be anywhere in their however many square mile territories. So it was a very slim chance, but it was exciting because,
Now, were you still in the Tetons, or had you gone up to Yellowstone?
No. We were in the Tetons.
Okay.
And we're, but you're surrounded by this spectacular, and this is, the thing about birding, even if you don't see the bird, you're in nature. And in the Grand Tetons, you're in spectacular nature, kind of like jagged peaks behind you and conifer forests around you. And just, it was just spectacular. And it was an adventure. We were like, are we going to see it? What are we going to do? And she was smart as heck. in terms of what she did to sort of increase the possibilities that we might find one. She knew exactly what kind of habitat, what to listen for. And we're going along, and I'm just having a grand old time. It's an adventure. And then she goes, Christian, and she just points. And I'm like, what? And big as life, not more than what, 10 feet away. And just not perturbed by our presence at all. It was like, yeah, human, so what? So yeah, and it was like, okay, you want textbook? Okay, front view, swivel the head a bit, side view. And when it gives a side view, it's incredible because the profile of the bird's face,
Yes.
it has none. It's
Yes.
flat. It's flat. So you see this tube of a neck, and then it just ends when it gives you, perfect profile. Because that face is so concave to be able to collect sound, which is
That
how it
dish
reads
that they've
attention.
got. We'll throw a picture up on the screen as Chris is telling this story, but if you've not had the good fortune of seeing one, take a look at the picture because what Chris is describing is amazing. They've got this dish that allows them to identify prey up to 2 feet in the snow, 2
Yeah.
feet deep.
Yeah, they hunt blind, essentially. They don't
Yeah.
see their prey, they hear it. And then they
Yeah.
punch down with their talons through the snowpack to grab their prey. That's what I've read anyway, is how they hunt. Now, to see that, I'm going to have to brave the cold, and maybe that will happen one day. But here
I
I
actually
was.
did get to see it just north of where you did in Yellowstone in the winter. Now, you would have loved it because it was minus 25 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, I was very much looking forward to getting you up to Sac Zim in minus 30 degrees to look for this thing. So there is my disappointment, is my
So
cruel
gonna
side.
happen.
Yeah, but I did see one at Yellowstone, got 2 hours with it, and I got to see it hunt 3 times, twice successfully. But
Oh, wow.
you're right. It punches through the snow with its talons, this perfect snowbank. I mean, you, as a human, you have no idea that there's a mole or a vole or a mouse or whatever they're hunting for. Remarkable and stunningly beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah. No,
So
they're
what
just
kind of
gorgeous.
tree was it in? What habitat were you looking in?
It was conifer. Now, see,
Okay.
now you're gonna get my ignorance because I'm like, it's in the tree when someone
It's
asks me where the bird is.
green tree.
Yeah, I've gotten better. I can do oak and maple and birch, but
Okay.
all conifers kind of blur together to me. So it was in a conifer. But the interesting thing is they stay low. They don't go to the top of the tree or anything. Apparently, great grays stay in the lower half of the tree, and this bird was at pretty much eye level. It was pretty remarkable and just a delight. So we just drank it in, and then we're like, okay, we're moving on now because we want the bird to have some peace and we don't want to disturb it, and we're going to let it do its thing. And it was a delight. It was great.
Oh, that's spectacular. Now, and Chris is not a photographer by design. You have told me that you feel it intrudes on the moment or distracts you from what you want to pull out of birding, right?
Yeah, I mean, I might have a different attitude if I had, a lot of birders coming up now. That's kind of how they learn how to bird is with a camera. So, that works for them, great. For me, I would find it too distracting because I'd worry about, am I getting the perfect shot? As opposed to just being in the moment and drinking in the experience. So that's the way I prefer to do it. But, everybody's got their own thing.
Okay. So now does this leave the gyrfalcon as your nemesis bird?
Yep.
All right. So we'll just shift that opening episode and we'll go get you a gyrfalcon. How's that?
That sounds fine. And gyrfalcon is I feel like is more of a nemesis bird because I've actually tried to get that one several times and come up empty each time. So.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to find. I've only seen one, and not. It was a great look, but from a distance. So it was perched out in the open, and as I tried to approach, my hobbit-like skills did not work, and it it took off. So for although it won't be a traditional full nemesis bird for me, I'll be just as excited to you to spot a gyr as when we nail that gyrfalcon. So that'll be fun. And for those of you that are watching, by the way, and not listening, you're looking at one of the prides of Chris's life, which is his rooftop. And I believe Chris is not a big lister. It is not part of his birding world, but you do keep a rooftop list, don't you?
And I got to add a new bird to it. Was it yesterday? No, the day before yesterday.
What did you add?
I'm sitting up here. First of all, my binoculars are downstairs, which is very rare this time of year, particularly because I keep the binoculars at the ready in case anything shows up while I'm up here. But I was having a horde of people over. And so, social gathering. So the binoculars are away and, people are arriving and I'm chit chatting and I hear this chip and I'm like, I'm sorry. Y'all have to go do whatever y'all are gonna do without me. I'm hearing a warbler from behind me in my garden, and I have to see what it is. So I'm like, and some people are like, oh, what are you seeing? I'm like, not now. Give me a second. And sure enough, there was a small warbler, and you have to understand, I'm in the middle of downtown Manhattan in a little tiny roof garden, which I plant native plants, and I have a fountain going, a naturalistic fountain. So it might pull in some things during migration, but not a lot. So to get a warbler up here, I'm always excited because it's so rare. And so I'm looking at this thing, and it's one of those drab, confusing guys. He's mostly obscured by leaves. I have no binoculars, and I'm like, I don't care. This is my job to get this bird. And then finally it came out just enough and just long enough for notice that it was almost entirely drab gray, but it had very, very faint and very fine streaks all down the breast. And I'm like, Cape May. It's a fall Cape May. And so yeah, I get to add that to my list. Number 53.
First one on the rooftop.
Yep.
All right. Well, I have an order in which I like to ask my questions. And the problem with dealing with people like Chris is he screws up the order of my questions.
Yep.
And so he has done that now. Since he mentioned warblers, it's important that we talk about this now. Chris is a warbler guy. Chris is a Central Park warbler guy. Chris is a Central Park migration warbler guy.
But who isn't a warbler person? I mean, we all love warblers. We do.
Well, talk to us about, we're going to talk about the things that, for example, Chris can't drive to Central Park. We're going to talk about the incident that happened in May of 2020 in Central Park. Central Park is critical and a big part of Chris's life. But Chris, talk to us about spring migration. Talk to us about warblers. And then eventually we're going to funnel that right down to the Blackburnians. So,
all right. So
just do it. Run with your joy here.
So warblers, I always describe warblers as essentially butterflies with personality. They are, very small, smaller than sparrows for the most part, very active. The average civilian who is not a birder might not ever know that they're there. And yet they pass through New York City during migration. Now, it's important to recognize that there are no warblers that breed in Central Park. None, which is really kind of shocking and surprising when you think about it, because there's a lot of probably suitable habitat, but none of them.
I wonder if they did historically. I wonder if they did 2 centuries ago.
They may have in pre-colonial times or something like that. I would be surprised if they didn't in pre-colonial times. But of course, Central Park did not exist until 18 whatever. I'm losing the exact year. But anyway, so here we are in the middle of Manhattan, New York City, and we have these feathered jewels, this wide variety of warblers, because in the East, there's 35 different species you can get, whereas in the West, you're much more limited and there's not as much diversity, variety of species. That's the pride and joy of the East, is that we get this great variety of warblers. So during migration, and especially spring migration, when you've got the males and they're in their best finery and they're singing, so you're getting the full-on species, they're funneling up the coast because they're on the Atlantic Flyway, following the coastline, heading up north, and they hit the New York metropolitan area, and it's a sea of concrete. And it's they're like, oh, where are we going to rest? Where are we going to refuel? And then they see this emerald rectangle in the middle of Manhattan with water and with understory. So there's cover for them, and they just all funnel in. So it concentrates the birds. It's basically warbler concentrate on a good day in the spring. And since I am on the roof garden, there are helicopters and things passing by, so there will be background noise. Anyway, so the warblers funnel in, they're concentrated. It's what's called a migrant trap. It concentrates the birds. You get kind of the same effect in McGee Marsh in Ohio. So it's a point where the birds get funneled in, and you can see a lot of them very easily. In fact, I've had birders from Costa Rica come to Central Park to bird. And I'm like, are you insane? You're from Costa Rica. You should be birding there. And it's like, oh no, Central Park is great for birds during the migration. And they're absolutely right. So that's where I love to spend my time, particularly the spring migration, because I am a creature of habit. I love males, and I love the spring males, and they're in full song, and you get to drink that in, and it's just amazing. It's a wonderful experience. On a great day, you will break 20 different warbler species.
So describe that great day. Describe how you get from the apartment to Central Park. Are you ideally alone with a small group of friends, with another group of birders?
No,
Describe to me that amazing May day.
sure. I'm getting up at a ridiculously early hour in the morning, like about 4:30. Throw down some food. I grab my binoculars. I grab food to go for refueling later in the morning because I'll be out there for like 5 hours, maybe six. I jump on the subway, which is incredibly unreliable that early, so I have to leave myself plenty of time because I want to get to Central Park just a little bit before dawn. Because then you get the phenomenon they call dawn chorus, where the birds just kind of burst into song all at once. And if you're an earbirder like me, you're getting basically a table of contents of what to look for and what's around. So, and it's also just fabulous, to walk in and you've got the whole of Central Park to yourself, and the light is just spilling over the horizon, and there's all these wonderful songs of all these warblers and vireos and flycatchers and tanagers, and you're just like, this is glorious. So you walk in, I bird alone, certainly in the morning, but I birded Central Park so long that, of course, there's a whole crew of us who know each other, regulars. So eventually, in the course of the morning, I'll fall in. But for that first, little bit, I'm usually alone or with one really close friend of mine or one or two of them who, we tend to be the dawn patrol and get there early. And so we'll
And
fall in.
ideally, you're there before the singing starts, right?
Right.
You get
Right.
there in silence, you get there in darkness, and the song and the sun start to come up.
It's not darkness, but it's kind of twilighty.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of song, but then it just builds, and then suddenly it's like tons of song on a good day. And there's just song everywhere, and you don't know where to look. Those are the best days when you don't know where to look. We get fewer and fewer of those these days. We used to
Do you
call
have
them
an ideal weather? Do you prefer clear, cloud cover, 60s, 70s? What again, it's your perfect day.
wind direction. I am looking for a morning where overnight the winds have been out of the southwest, because the birds are not stupid. They will take the free ride of having the wind pushing them up. But then if it's southwest, it pushes them to the coast. And then there's only so far they can go, and then they got to follow the coast. So it basically if it's southwest winds in the springtime, it'll push them right to us. Conversely, there was one year where we had what we called the non-slot. This is going back like 20 years now or something like that, where it should have been our peak days. And we had very, very few birds, like none, like scary none. And I think what had happened was we had southeast winds steadily for days. And what it did was basically push the birds around us. So I think McGee Marsh probably had a really great year that year because they got pushed inland to there as opposed to them getting pushed to the coast for us. So that's my operating theory. And I'm testing it out over the years that when McGee has a good year, we have a bad year in Central Park. And when Central Park has a good year, McGee Marsh has a bad year. So, but anyway, it's all about the warblers in both places during the spring migration. So yeah, so I'm out there in the morning. I am stomping around. Well, hopefully not stomping too loudly, but mostly I'm listening. I'm trying to break myself of the habit of relying on my ears too much because you'll miss stuff. Not everything is singing, but yeah, I will let my ears be my general guide. I try to keep the sun to my back. I kind of have a route that lets me do that. And it's funny because on the rare occasion that I come in the afternoon instead of dawn and I bird the park, I'm completely disoriented because I'm trying to follow my usual path, and it's putting the sun in my face and in my eyes every second. So, but yeah, and then I'm just seeing what I can turn up, and it's a treasure hunt. It turns every morning into a treasure hunt. You have
Now
no idea.
the high period for spring migration in Central Park is from when to when?
The songbird migration is the bulk of it is from the middle of April through the end of May.
Okay.
There are birds that are coming through, before the middle of April. There are birds that come, into June, but the bulk of it is from middle of April until the end of May. Our
And that
peak,
Go
our
ahead.
peak is generally the first 2 weeks of May.
And that, by the way, is a period in your life where you don't travel, you don't do speaking engagements out of where you have to leave New York. That
Right.
is your time every year.
That is my holy month of Ramadan, as I like to
Okay.
call
Well,
it.
fair enough. We might need to come up with a different term for it, but I think that works. So help me out with migration now. So an individual bird, I mean, they come, they drop in, they follow the wind, they see, as you decide, the emerald rectangle. Are they there for a day or two and then they're gone and then they're replaced and backfilled with new birds?
It really depends. It depends on the bird and the weather.
Okay.
Weather is a huge factor. I mean, if they arrive and then there's days of like north winds, they're probably going to stick around for a while.
Okay.
So it really depends on the bird itself and the weather. An exhausted bird is probably going to spend a couple of days refueling. So we can have them for, I think we've had some, sometimes we've had, it's the rare ones that we particularly notice, because the other ones you don't know if you're seeing the same one or
Right.
replacement. But the we've had rare ones that have stuck around for as much as 5 days.
Okay.
So
And
yeah.
and there's a bit of a pattern to which warblers show up early and which warblers show up late, right?
Oh
So,
no, there is a procession. They
okay, so
have their
tell us
people.
what the procession is.
All right, first warbler back is a pine warbler, and that'll be as early as March, then end of March. After the pine will come the yellow rumps, the black and whites. Sorry, I'm skipping the palms. The palms will be after the pines,
Okay.
and then the yellow rumps and the black and whites. So those four are the first wave that come. And then after that, likely will be prairie next. And then it's sort of you get sort of the first of the main sequences, I call it. You'll get the black-throated greens, the yellows, the northern parallels. Who am I forgetting in that group? And then a little after that, you'll get black-throated blue and chestnut-sided. And then by about early May, you can start to get your first Blackburnians, and they'll run through the whole month of May after that. And then, later in the season, magnolias come in numbers and redstarts come in numbers. You'll get them in the beginning, but they really arrive about the middle of the month. They start really coming in big numbers, magnolias and redstarts, middle of May. And then you get the late warblers, which are like the Wilsons, the Canada. What else comes late? That I'm ignoring. It's hard to do it off the top of my head, but
Of
then
course it is.
the last ones are the blackpoll. And the blackpoll, again, you'll get one or two individuals super early and we'll all freak out. Generally don't arrive in big numbers until the end of May. I say generally because this year was super atypical and we had big numbers of blackpolls that arrived May 1 and through the whole month, which is really unusual.
Okay.
Generally, blackpoll warblers arrive in big numbers at the end of the month, and then the last one is the morning warbler, and that is a tough bird to get because they are skulky. There's not a lot of them, so you got to really work to get your morning warbler, and it's why I always say, never come between a Central Park birder who has been, carefully gathering his warblers the whole season, and the only one he's missing is the morning warbler. And God forbid you come between a birder and that morning warbler, and they're trying to round out their list for the season.
I will make sure that I pay attention to that rule when I get there. A great spring migration. How many different species of warblers will you see?
I've never added it up, but I would say it's got to be about 30.
Okay.
Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I don't think so. I think it's
Okay.
good. I mean, especially if you get all the rarities and, that's the thing is you get a collector mentality, talk about your listing. I am not so great about assiduously keeping a life list, but my spring list, for each season is, of course, well maintained. And so, you hear that a yellow-throated warbler has shown up and in this part of the world, they're not super rare, but they're rare. They're uncommon
Okay.
because we're a little bit too far north.
All
So,
right.
you hear that a yellow-throated warbler has shown up and you're running to get that because you don't want to miss it for the season. And then you got to
Right.
get your planetary, another one, rare one for this area. So you're running to get that. And then, oh my God. They always say in Central Park, if you're in trouble, don't yell help. Yell cerulean. And people will come running.
Well, a certain group of people will come running.
Exactly.
Right. There's going to be a large number of people in Central Park who have no idea what you're saying when cerulean. You could be speaking something from Star Trek,
True.
yelling
True.
cerulean. But if you're in trouble at 6:30 in the morning in Central Park
In
and
the
you yell
ramble
cerulean,
and you're in trouble, yell cerulean in the spring and you'll get people running from every direction. And even rarer than cerulean these days is golden wing for us. We get so few golden wings because in the East Coast they're being genetically swamped by their close relative, the blue wing warbler. So for us to get a bona fide golden wing, rare.
and that gets people moving to the park.
Yeah, and then of course there's the ultra rare, the warbler that no one will ever exceed for Central Park. The one time we got a Kirtland's warbler and we lost our minds. We lost our minds.
When was it?
Oh God, that's got to be 10 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah, and the guy who found it, Kevin Topping, lives in legend forever. I've never met the man, but he lives in legend forever.
But he holds a spot in your mind
Yep.
because he found the Kirtlands.
And got the word out.
Okay.
He was in a birding in a part of the park where people generally don't bird. He found the bird. He knew what he was looking out at, and he got the word out.
So it took a
Right.
lot of things to come together for you
It
to
was a
get to see
real
a Kirtland's.
it was a real needle in the haystack moment.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, since we're here already and we're talking about warblers, talk to me about your love of Blackburnian warblers. Talk to me about queens. I'm gonna ask you to share your myth because I think the audience would love to hear that. So talk Blackburnian. This, by the way, this is Chris's bird. Blackburnian warbler is Chris's bird. So he's got
It's a
a
lot.
myth about the bird. He
It's
goes
a,
back to go, you go.
it's a lot of people's bird. I mean,
Okay, fair
generally
enough.
you will find people polarize around certain warblers in particular as their favorite. Black-throated blue is hugely popular. Blackburnian is hugely popular. Hooded is hugely popular. But for me, it's Blackburnian, and it is a showstopper. It is a little tiny black and white and gray bird, but you get a good spring male, and he's got a day glow, fiery orange throat. I mean, incandescent. Like someone took a black
Like a hummingbird throat.
No, because hummingbirds, it's iridescence. Not iridescent, incandescent. So,
Okay.
Hummingbirds, it catches the light a certain way, and then you see the color in this spectacular way. With the Blackburnian, it's just he's been eating his beta carotene, and that orange is just going to glow no matter what. So it's just a really beautiful, beautiful bird, and with an incredibly high pitched song, probably one of the most high pitched of any of our warblers. And the last note is even higher pitched than all the rest of it. In fact, a lot of people can't hear that last note. I'm hoping my ears stay good for many years so I can always hear that last note, but it slides impossibly high. So I just love them. I had never seen one, and I called in sick one day. I was legitimately sick. I had a cold. So I called in sick to work
In
one day.
case your boss is watching.
Well, this was many, many jobs ago, but I was sitting home. I was living in Queens at the time. It was a beautiful day outside. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be sick, I might as well be sick outdoor in the sun. So I went to the local park at the end of the block. I had my binoculars with me, and I'm just, looking around at whatever migrants there are. And then I look at the top of the tree, and there is this little thing that has only existed in my mind up until now from the pictures in the book. And there it is, a Blackburnian, and I was over the moon.
And you're still in love with them.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And what you're referring to is when you said the myth, there was one particular encounter with the Blackburnian I had where they tend to stay high in the trees. And this Blackburnian was at eye level and arm's length away. And he did not care about me in the slightest. And he sat there for about 5 minutes, 7 minutes, I don't know. And I couldn't move. And he sat there and he would just throw his head back and that song would pour out of him. What could you do but stand there and witness this?
Was this in Central Park?
This was in Central Park, yeah.
Okay.
And so the only way I could think of explaining what that experience was like, how it made me feel, what that said to me was to write a myth. That's how my brain works. So in the myth, the sun gets up one morning and it looks down in the east and it sees tigers with stripes prowling the forest and it sees rhododendron forests everywhere. And the sun is like, oh my goodness, that's incredible. And then by noon, the sun looks down and it's seeing walking towers with long necks and these weird animals with flapping ears and long noses and these other tremendous tank animals with horns on their nose. And the sun's like, oh my God, this life on this planet is wild. And then the sun finally is setting in the west and it looks down and it sees this forest through all the Americas filled with these slow moving hairy people that stick to the tops of the trees called sloths. And it sees these birds made out of jewels that are like propellers buzzing through the forest. And the sun was so moved at that point as it was setting in the west by everything it had seen in the course of the whole day that it started to cry tears of joy. So these flaming orange tears are falling to the earth and it briefly formed this pool, this lake of orange fire in the west. And all these creatures in the west were like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. We have to go look at this. But they were all too scared to come too close because they were afraid they'd get burned. And then one little bird flown a long, long way and was really tired to get get there to see this wonder, this lake of fire. And just as the lake of fire was about to evaporate and be gone forever, it got to the edge of it and it said, thirsty, because it had flown so long. And it said to itself, such a gift should not go ignored. And it took a drink. And that's how the Blackburnian warbler got its fiery orange throat. And when it sings, the last note of the song slides impossibly high as the fire from the sun, lodged in its throat, tries to return to the sun. And the joy of the sun in a world full of life is known to everybody who looks and who listens.
I love that story. You've told it to me before, and I absolutely love it. So thank you for sharing. And I am certain that the audience is going to love it as well. All right, we're going to go back to Central Park because we have to. But before that, let's go back to your youth a little bit and tell me about red-winged blackbird and how you got fired up as a birder.
Well, that was my spark bird, the red-winged blackbird. I built a bird feeder and put it up in the backyard for some unknown reason. And I should add that nature was always big in our household because my dad was a science teacher, and for a long stretch of that, he was specifically a biology teacher. He was always into nature, always into camping, and so it was big in our house. But I put up this bird feeder, and this crow came to the feeder with this patch of red in the shoulder of the wings, and I was all excited. I was about like 8 or 9 years old. I'm like, I've discovered a new species of crow. And I was so excited. And then I found out they're red-winged blackbirds. But it still remains one of my favorite birds. It is, for me, the sign of spring when the male redwings come back. And you hear that "okari" cry ringing out. That I hear that, and I'm like, it's spring.
Yes, and it's a great call, by the way. And you don't confuse it with anything else. You're not sitting there thinking, gee, I wonder what that was. You hear a male red-winged blackbird calling out, I'm ready, honey. It's the world knows. Okay, you mentioned your folks and camping and stuff. Talk to us about a cross-country trip in a VW.
Sure.
Going out in one and coming back in another, if I remember right.
That's correct. Both my parents were school teachers, so they had the summers off. So one summer, again, my dad, being a big nature enthusiast, packed everybody into the camper. It was one of those old Volkswagen Westphalia campers, little more than a van, with a pop-up top. And so it was me, my sister, my dad, my mom, and the family Cocker Spaniel all packed into this little Volkswagen camper for the summer, going across country, heading west through Canada, coming down the West Coast and coming back through the States. And it was a lot of driving and a lot of time on the road. And, you know, sometimes there's spectacular scenery and sometimes it's cornfields and cornfields and cornfields. So there was not a lot of room in the car. But again, my dad being a science teacher, one of the few books he brought along with us was Roger Tory Peterson's Field Guide to Eastern Birds. And then halfway through that trip, partway through that trip, we got the Golden Guide came out. And that was amazing because the plates were directly opposite the text. You know, you didn't have to find the plates in the middle. Big innovation. Wow. So
you think that would have been in the Petersons?
Eventually it was. But so we spent hours on the road. And if I got bored because it was cornfields and cornfields, I would flick through the book and just look at the pretty pictures. I had a very plastic mind at that age. It wasn't filled with a lot of competing stuff. So by the time we hit the West Coast, we're at a rest stop and this bird flies by, flap, 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 flap. And I go, oh, look, Mom and Dad, there goes a black-billed magpie. And they're like, how the hell does he know that? It's because I remembered the book. So that sort of cemented birding in my youth.
Well, and you were telling me that at one point you had memorized all of the antelope in Africa.
Oh yeah, that was when I was really young. I think it was from watching this anime. I don't think they even called it anime back then. One of those cartoons from Japan called Kimba the White Lion. And it was all about the animals in Africa. And it just caused a fascination for me with all the different kinds of antelopes. And so I was like, oh, well, you know, there's an antelope called the okapi, which is actually related to the giraffe, not a antelope like the others, but, you know, an impalas. Now I don't know them like I used to, but yeah, I used to know them.
Could you do it with a flashcard if we were showing flashcards?
Probably not. And that's having been to Africa now a couple of times. It's, you know, nature, all the diversity of nature. It's just fascinating. When I'm here in my roof garden, I'm obsessed with the insects. You know, I'm learning the butterflies and the dragonflies. I want to know what the bees are, but there's just too many of them to learn them. So
I was going through, my son and I were down in Texas over the weekend working on another project. We went down to see the Mexican free-tailed bats.
Mm.
The largest colony in the world of bats is in San Antonio. 20 million bats, by the way, in one cave. But we went to the San Antonio Botanical Gardens, which were filled with butterflies. So I'm snapping pictures the whole time. And then over the last couple of days, I'm coming back and identifying them, trying to figure out what we saw, because I don't know enough to be able, I don't know nearly enough to be able to identify them. But as I go through and some of the wasps and the bees and especially the butterflies, it was a blast to go through and do that. And a little bit of that'll soak in and eventually I'll learn some more about that. So, excuse me, that'll be fun. Now, you came back, you went to Harvard as a young man, and you joined two clubs at Harvard, both of which freed you from things that you weren't real public about when you were in high school. So tell us about
Well,
the clubs and how that changed your life.
one was very public and the other wasn't. I knew I was gay from like the age of 5 years old, which always sort of astonishes some people. But no, I knew what the scoop was. I just knew enough to keep my mouth shut. And it's funny how you metabolize that even at an early age, even subconsciously, I shouldn't talk about this. And so, yeah, for my entire youth up until I went away to college, I was a closeted kid and nobody knew it. I was a depressed kid because of that and nobody knew it. Everyone thought I was happy-go-lucky, sunny person, and outwardly I was, but part of me was dying on the inside. So when I went away to Harvard, or when I got the admissions packet, and it listed, some of the organizations. And I noticed right away the Harvard Ornithological Club. And the other thing I noticed was the Gay Students Association. I'm like, yeah, two things I need. And I say one thing was public and one thing wasn't when I was in high school. And that's because, my God, I was such a nerd in high school. I would walk home through the woods with my binoculars, and what should have taken me like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, took me 2.5 hours during spring migration because I was looking for birds all that time and having a great old time. And, everybody knew I was the crazy birder.
What was high school on Long Island?
Yeah. On Long
Okay.
Island.
Okay. All right. And then before you got into birding, or that's not true. You were into birding, but there was a period in your life when you were heavily involved in comic books.
Sure. Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Well, I guess mythic storytelling has always been a huge part of my life since I was a kid, which is kind of weird, but it's true. Which is probably why I'm like, oh, there's a Blackburnian warbler. It's making me feel special. How do I express this? I'll write a myth. Who does that? But
A small
I always
group of people, by the way, is the answer.
Well, I always say that superhero comics are the last bastion of myth making in Western society because myth is really atrophied in Western society. So I had always been hooked on comics and, I kind of fell away for a while. And then, when I was like a junior in high school, it came back with a vengeance. And I actually found a group of friends who were into it the way I was, into science fiction and into comic books and all that nerdy geek stuff. Now it's mainstream, now it rules the culture. But back then it was nerdy geek stuff.
And which ones were you into? What were your favorites?
Uncanny X-Men was my favorite comic book, is my favorite comic book. I mean, I don't really read comics like I used to. It can get to be a bit much after a while. But yeah, Uncanny X-Men, because it was a perfect parable for discrimination. And as a queer kid, as a Black kid, to see a group of people who are different and yet use their difference and what's special about them to the service of humanity. That was a powerful message. And to read about how they're discriminated against and yet they still triumph. That was a huge message. So
Are you suggesting that the annual meeting of Black gay birders is not a massively attended organization? You felt just a little bit different as a young man?
You could have stopped at the meeting of Blackbirders is not a massive organization, though our numbers are soaring and growing. Yes. We're learning each other and about each other and connecting with each other, which is really great. So that's really nice.
Then let's jump to that. Let's jump to May 25th, 2020, because on May 24th, you were an enthusiastic, lifelong birder, but other than with some friends in Central Park, fairly anonymous. Is that fair to say?
I was known in the Central Park community, right, but not outside of it for birding.
And then something happened on May 25th, and by May 26th, you may have been the best known birder in the United States, if not in the world. So talk to us about what happened on May 25th. And then from there, we'll talk about the TV show and the books and the growth and Blackbirder Week and all of the things that came out of that.
Sure, in a nutshell, because it's really not the most interesting thing. I was birding in Central Park early in the morning, as I've already described. I was actually looking for my morning warbler for the year, and there are rules for the Ramble, which is one of the two best spots to bird in Central Park. It's called the Ramble, and it's got lots of twisty paths, and it's heavily wooded, and it has streams and things. So it's really a magnet for the birds, and it's designed, or the rules are designed to protect that habitat and protect the wildlife that use it. So one of those rules is that dogs must be on the leash at all times in the Ramble. It's been the rule forever. There are signs posted everywhere saying that. But, there are certain people who, don't think the rules apply to them, whatever, have a sense of entitlement, especially in the zip codes that surround that area. They are people of wealth and privilege, and they think they should be able to do what they want, whatever. So I'm in the park. I hear someone yelling for their dog at the top of their lungs. I'm like, okay, that means it's off the leash. And sure enough, it comes tearing through the shrubs right where I was hoping to find a morning warbler. And then, so I just kind of stood there and waited. And then eventually the owner of the dog came into view, and I waited until she was standing right next to the sign that says dogs must be on the leash at all times in the Ramble, because it always helps to have the visual cue to help. And I just, I said, look, ma'am, dogs in the Ramble have to be in leash all times. And, she wasn't having it. She was going to do what she wanted to do. Sadly for her, I am not a person who backs down. So I was like, all right, well, I have been dealing with this for the better part of 35 years, and I have means of pushing back. And one of them is, at the time, I had some dog treats with me. I don't own a dog, but if you want to get a dog out of planted area, treats. The dog's like, yay! And we'll get out of the planted area. So I pulled out the dog treats. I didn't even throw any. I didn't get that far. The second she saw the dog treats, she went from unperturbed, my dog won't come to you, to panicked. And I think that, she just kind of spiraled downward from there. So, we got into a verbal confrontation. And then, to try to get an upper hand in our conflict, as she was hauling her dog around by the collar so that it was choking, she said, look, if you don't stop recording me, because at that point I had started recording to her on my cell phone, which is something a number of us had started doing in Central Park to document the off-leash behavior and how rampant it was for the police, for the Central Park Conservancy, for the Parks Department, so that we could try to get some amelioration of this problem. It was really bad that year because it was COVID. That's the other thing. It was COVID, and so all the dog runs were closed. So, and all the birders weren't out. None of the birders were out because of COVID, because it tends to be an older population, the birds. Right. So a lot of people just skipped that spring season entirely so as not to expose
And that
themselves.
was the first spring of COVID. That was 2020, right?
In 2020, nobody knew. People had just barely started to mask. Nobody knew how it was spread. There were no vaccines. It was bad. People were dying at a rate of 500 a day in New York City. So it was really, really bad. We were all scared. It was awful. It was a bad time. We forget now because we kind of wiped it out, what it was like back then, but it was awful. So anyway, so I'm recording her, and I'm like, I'm going to record until that dog is on the leash. And she says, if you don't stop recording me, I'm going to call the police and tell them that an African-American man is threatening my life. And of course, I'm like, she's going there with this. And the fact that she said it to me, because she hadn't called anybody. And I know I'm an African-American man. I've known that for quite some time.
So this wasn't startling news for you.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that she phrased it that way, it was definitely an attempt to use race to intimidate me, and the history of violence by authorities against Black people because we're perceived as inherently criminal by our skin color. It was an attempt to harness that in an attempt to get leverage in our verbal confrontation. Was it conscious on her part? I have no idea. I can't speak to her. I'm not inside her head. I can't speak to her motivations, but whether conscious or subconscious, she tapped into that and went there. And that presented me with a choice, which is, part of me was like, oh crap, I better stop recording right now, or else, my life will go sideways. And I was like, about a split second later, and my internal monologue was like, nope, she doesn't get to do that. She does not get to use race to try to intimidate me, and I will not be complicit in my own dehumanization by complying to her attempt to use race to get what she wants. So at that point, I just made the choice that I was going to keep recording until that dog was on the leash, as I would do if I was black, white, blue, green, purple. And
Or
she would have to
fiery
be
orange.
sorry?
Or fiery orange.
Or fiery orange. And she was going to have to then decide what she was going to do. And she did. And the other interesting thing about the whole thing is a lot of people think, oh, he was recording because of the racial incident. I had no idea when I started recording that she was going to take it racial. I was recording because the dog was off the leash.
So it was a canine incident that she made racial.
Exactly. I mean, the second oldest story in the Ramble is dog owner versus birder. Nobody cares about that. That's not front page news. You know, what made it noteworthy was that she injected race into the situation in a way that really illuminated, I think, for a lot of people, not for Black people, because we know, but illuminated for a lot of other people that, you know, wow, Obama's been president and this still happens, you know, in the middle of liberal New York. This still happens. And then, of course, the other thing that made it take on a life of its own or that kept it alive was the fact that that very same day, later that same day in Minneapolis, a white police officer would kneel on George Floyd's neck until that man was dead. So the two incidents kind of informed each other. Anyway, so that's what happened with that. I recorded until the moment she put the dog on the leash. I said, thank you, and turned the recording off and went about my business because she did not get to derail the rest of my morning. I had birds to find.
So how did it go from there to a national and international news story?
I was right where you see me now, up in my roof garden, hanging out with some friends because it was Labor Day that day. Oh, sorry, not Labor Day, Memorial Day. It was Memorial Day. I was hanging with some friends, you know, having a cookout and having some drinks, and all of a sudden my cell phone rings. Well, no, I'm sorry, I'm skipping an essential part, which is that typically when I get home from birding, 9 times out of 10, I will post during the spring migration what birds I've seen so that, you know, my friends, birders and non-birders alike, can see why they don't see me if they're not birding for a month.
Mm-hmm.
This was not a bird, but this was something significant that happened while I was out and about. So I put it on Facebook. Almost immediately, I got a call from 2 friends saying, can you make this post public so I can share it? And I'm like, all right. So I made it public. And then I got a call from my sister who said, can I repost this on Twitter at the time? Because she was very plugged into Black Twitter, which is sort of an informal network of Black people on Twitter. And I'm like, all right, yeah, sure. And then it just kind of took off. And so, yeah, I kept getting more and more, went viral, as they say. And then I'm up here hanging out with friends, having dosed myself with a margarita or two, and my cell phone starts ringing and it's ABC News. I don't know how they got my cell phone number, but they're looking for a comment. And I'm like trying to pretend I'm not dosed with margaritas as I'm talking to them. So it was a crazy time. It was kooky.
But it led to some great things.
Well, that's the thing, is that the way I sort of say it is, you know, because I've always fought for certain things, always, you know, long before any of this happened. I've always done my best to push for equality for queer people, justice for Black people, and birds for all people. You know, that's kind of my shtick. That's my thing.
That's
and
a
then
good
this
shtick,
happens,
by the way.
Yeah, you know, it needs to be done. So all of a sudden, there are all these people sticking microphones and cameras in my face. And I'm like, look, if you're going to stick microphones and cameras in my face, I'm going to use it to say what I think needs to be said. So that's what I did. And, you know, so basically it gave me a much bigger platform to do exactly that, to talk about justice for Black people, equality for queer people, and birds for all people. And a mourning dove just flew into the fountain and is taking a drink.
Well, that's spectacular. So when you say it led to a television show, it led to a best-selling book, it led to Black Birders Week. Tell us about those things. They're significant. Now, they're significant to you, and that's important, but they're significant to birders in general, black, white, yellow, it doesn't matter. And a lot of those things are significant to all of us, right? Squirrels and chipmunks. I mean,
But
and so
because it happened because I'm a birder, that put the spotlight on birding, which
yes,
doesn't that often get a spotlight.
yep.
And it put a spotlight on Black birders, which is like, some people were like, that's a thing? It's like,
Well,
yeah, that's a thing.
couldn't it be argued that, not that it's right that it was, but that was, well, of course, we have to save this for our conversation with Scott and Drew, but couldn't it be argued that that was really the first true spotlight on Blackbirders?
True spotlight. I mean, I don't know what true means in this context. It's the first.
A large spotlight.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, birding in general didn't get that much of a spotlight. So blackbirders in particular, yeah, no, we didn't get much of a spotlight. In fact, I used to always say when I was a kid birding that, oh yeah, you can count all of us blackbirders in North America on the fingers on one hand. Probably wasn't true back then either, but it seemed like it and it felt like it. And certainly there were many fewer of us than there are now. And that's one of the amazing things is that, a lot of, especially doing the show, when I started doing the TV show, I love the fact, like I said, I'm for birds for all people. But one of the things I especially loved was that the face of this birding show, one of the first birding shows on a major network, was a black face because little kids could look at this and think, we do that? And one of the best letters I got in doing the show was a letter from a mom in Westchester. And she said, my two little girls, they started to get into birding at the end of the school year. And so I thought, oh, well, how do I keep them interested over the summer or feed this interest? And I found your show. So I let them watch your show. Well, they've seen all episodes about 5 times. They quote you all the time. And I'm like, that's great. And then she said, and my two little girls are black. And I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, it's
Which is probably exactly what she was saying. That is not what. So tell us about the show. National Geographic came calling, right? So now you're in the spotlight. It's your 15 minutes, and Nat Geo calls. How do you go from that to winning an Emmy? Because a lot of us haven't won Emmys. Most of the clubs that you're a member of don't have very many members. And this is another one, Emmy Award, which has nothing to do with straight, gay, black, white. Not a lot of people have won Emmy Awards. So you go from I love birds, I love Central Park, I love the spring, and a couple of years later, you're holding up your Emmy saying, thank you very much, and I want to thank my parents and my partner. And how does that happen?
you know, uh, it's just, I think I had so much fun doing the show that I was able to communicate that and communicate the passion I have for birds, how they get me all excited. My friends have known this forever that don't get them started talking about birds because they'll go off. And so, yeah, that's what
And now
happened.
you have a national forum to do so.
Well, yeah.
They're putting a camera in your face and giving you a TV show.
And that was the other thing is that I was reasonably comfortable in front of a camera. Probably a couple of reasons for that. Who knows why altogether, but for whatever couple of reasons, I was fairly comfortable in front of a camera. So I just let my happiness at what I was doing and my passion for the birds communicated that as best as I could. And if there was a wow moment, I can't stop myself from being like, wow, this is incredible. So yeah, so hopefully that came through in the show. I mean, sadly, we were only 6 episodes and we were only 1 season because I could still be doing that right now.
And was that 2023?
Sounds right.
I think that's right. Tell everybody the name of the show and where they can
Sure.
find it, because people are going to go want to watch this.
Sure. The show is Extraordinary Birder with Christian Cooper. That's me.
Both those things are you, Extraordinary Birder and Christian Cooper.
Actually, no, because I was very clear from the beginning. Because I'm a birder. I'm a good birder. I have my skills, but I've met the extraordinary birders, and they're not me. They have skills that make mine pale in comparison. So for me, the title of the show was always about the people we met. And that was one of the joys of doing the show, was that I got to bring these people who were doing incredible things, whether they were birders or whether they were biologists or conservationists or just ordinary people, but who were doing great things for the birds and for our environment and for conservation. And I got to bring their stories that otherwise most people wouldn't hear and wouldn't know about. And I got to bring their stories to the fore. Those to me were the extraordinary birders. And that's what the show was really about. So anyway, it's called Extraordinary Birder with Christian Cooper. It was streamable on Disney Plus, but they changed their mix of what's on there. And so you can't stream it there anymore, but I think you can get it still on YouTube.
Okay.
So
I'll try to look that up and share that on screen here so people can find it. And I'm going to ask you to send me some photos that I can throw up, but send me a picture of your Emmy that I can put up, because I think that's really cool. Now,
it was cool when it happened because I saw there were 5 of us. So you only got a 20% chance. And I saw the other people's work. And as I watched their stuff, I was like, oh, damn.
oh damn.
There it goes. There it goes. I feel it slipping through my fingers. And then you're sitting there in, the glitzy, glamorous awards room, and suddenly they're saying your name. And you're like, what? What? My sister said I looked like a deer in the headlights.
But a happy deer.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And so another of the clubs with very few members that you are a member of is New York Times bestselling author. So tell us about, and by the way, I'm hoping with Why We Love Birds that I get to join that club, because I'm riding the coattails of guys like you and Scott Edwards and Pete Dunn and Ken Kaufman and Scott Weidensaul, who are all guests in the book. I'm counting on you guys letting me into the club when that book comes out. That's my plan. No one gives a crap about why I love birding, but I found 52 pretty fascinating people, and they're going to carry me so I can go to those meetings. But tell me about that. Tell me what prompted you to write the memoir, and how was it received, and did it impact your life other than the obvious, which is looking in the Sunday New York Times and seeing your name and your book in there? But tell us about it.
Again, all of a sudden, doors are open to me that weren't open before. And so, yeah, I chose to walk through them because it's a bigger platform for me to advocate for the things I care about. So writing a memoir was a way to tell my story and tell it beyond that one viral moment and put that one viral moment in context. I really didn't think anybody would be interested. I didn't think it would become a New York Times bestseller. But what I did, and the other thing is that I'd never read memoir. I still haven't read memoir. Never read a memoir in my life. So when I was approaching how to write this, I sort of approached it the way I would write a comic book, which is to, of course, a comic book is fiction. This is not. I have to be true to the what occurs, but you can still shape the story, how you tell the story to make it more interesting. What you put in, what you leave out. So in making those choices, I definitely brought a kind of cinematic comic book sensibility. So, I mean, for example, the book opens with me running through Central Park in desperation. And I don't want to give too much away if you haven't read it, but it's a fake out. I was running through Central Park in desperation, but because people are familiar with the story, they think, oh my God, he's running from the cops. He's scared. He's fighting. No, I was running because there was a Kirtland's warbler and I was desperate to get there and see it before it went away. That right there puts things in context. What matters? A Kirtland's warbler in Central Park matters. That woman and her nonsense, no. Well, and it's funny when people ask me about, oh, can you still bird Central Park, or is it too traumatic for you? And I'm like, trauma? What trauma? I'm like, I can be standing right where that incident happened, and I'm thinking about, the mourning warbler that 6 years ago hopped onto the wood chip path in the open for 5 continuous days. That's what I remember about that spot, not that business.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes.
And by the way, we'll throw the cover up, but the book is Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World.
Thank you for mentioning the name of the book, which you would think I, as the author, would actually do.
You know what? I'm pretty sure that the publicist would have told you that maybe that's an important component to the conversation, is throw the name of the damn book out there so maybe a couple more people will buy it.
So when I wrote my memoir, Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World.
Oh, it sounds better when you say it, by the way.
Well, and I also hear the audiobook is a blast, because with the audiobook, they put in a lot of the bird songs. If you can stomach my voice for that much continuous time, I wanted Morgan Freeman to read the book, but he was not available. So they had to satisfy themselves with me.
It's worth checking, by the way. It was worth a phone call. And I have to tell you, it's a weird thing because a lot of our audience doesn't know, but I've published about 50 different books, and a lot of them were Westerns. And when they were converted to audiobooks, they hired professionals to do it. Even though I've done a lot of voiceover work in my life, they hired people to do it. You think it's weird listening to it in your voice. Try listening to your words, your book, in someone else's voice. Because they did a great job, but the inflections weren't exactly where they were when I wrote it in my head. But now it's somebody else. And it's a very weird thing to turn on an audiobook of something you wrote. And to think people might be sitting there listening to this.
Until this very moment, I never even thought of that. So now I'm really, really glad that I read it and not
Yeah,
somebody else.
and it's weird because I've read others. I've done a lot of voiceover work, so I'm not unfamiliar with how my voice sounds or trying to interpret. But the publishers wanted to use somebody who's a professional book reader, and they wanted me to put my time into writing another book, not reading the one I already wrote. And so the first time they sent one to me, it's like, well, holy crap. So that's how this guy heard my book. When he read my book, that's how he heard it. And I mean, they did fine job on it, and the 7 people who bought it and listened to it, thank you very much. But it is an odd thing, by the way, to go through something like that. Now, there was one other, we'll call it a big issue, not a big issue, a big positive that came out of May 25th, which is Blackbirders Week. And you were among the group that founded that. You were among
No,
those.
no, actually, they founded it without my involvement whatsoever.
Okay.
In fact, when I heard Blackbirders Week, I was all excited, and I'm like, "Wait, this is because of me? And what happened to me that this kind of
Well,
happened?"
did you think it was about you, or did you think it was about crows when you Blackbirders Week, or
No,
those odd crows that you discovered that had the epaulets on the red and the yellow epaulets on their side? So tell me about it, because you have mentioned to me before that it's a significant thing,
yeah,
and
no,
it's opening doors and changing lives, right?
yeah, no, it's very gratifying that not just Blackbirders Week, which is in itself, amazing that happened and is still happening every year. Though I wish what had happened to me had happened in the first week of May as opposed to the last week of May, so that when Blackbirders Week comes around every year, there are still birds to find in Central Park. You don't know how many Blackbirders Week walks I've done where I'm like, okay, we'll see what's still around. But yeah, no, it's amazing not only that happened, but that there are a number of clubs that are specifically formed, to welcome blackbirders by blackbirders, that are open to everyone and make that openness a central part of their existence. I've met blackbirders who have formed clubs in Philadelphia, and he said to me, "Oh yeah, no, we formed this club because of you and what happened to you." And I was like, that blew my mind. So that's amazing that goes on, that came out of
Well,
Blackbirders.
I think it is extraordinary, and I have mentioned it previously, but I want to highlight it now. We are going to have a panel coming up in the next couple of months with Chris and Drew Lanham and Scott Edwards, 3 of the better known and better blackbirders in the country. And we're going to talk about how things have changed over the decades and how they still need to change and whatnot. And so that is an important discussion that we're going to have. And I'm excited about the 3 gentlemen that have chosen to or have agreed to be on the panel. And by the way, the podcasts for Drew Lanham and Scott Edwards are already out, so you can look those up. And
Yeah, if you don't know Scott Edwards, he is the head of the ornithology department at Harvard. When I found that out, I almost fainted because I'm
yeah,
like, wait, there's a black guy in charge of the ornithology department at Harvard? That's unbelievable.
a black guy who rode his bike across America with a sign on the bike that said Black Lives Matter. And I said to Scott, why didn't you just put a target on your back? You drove through America as a black man with a sign. And Scott also, and it's just like with you, Chris, it's partially about being black, but it's not all about being black. There's so many other things. Scott also heads up the Natural History Museum. And we had a fascinating conversation about Teddy Roosevelt and Audubon and how many animals are killed and why and all those things. And Drew Lanham, if you don't, but if I think you're the one that said I had to contact Drew. But
Well,
if
Drew
you,
Lanham, he is the dean of blackbirders. He is
and
our
he's a
heart and
poet.
soul. He is our heart and soul. He has been articulating our issues longer than anybody else. And he is actually he won a Genius Grant, one of those MacArthur Foundation grants that they call the Genius Grants. He won one. I think he's the first birder who ever has. So yeah, no, he's amazing. Scott is amazing. And I will say this when you have all of us on the show, to Scott, I will say it again. I am so insanely jealous that you rode your bike transcontinentally, just because I have dreamed of doing that my whole life, and you didn't dream it. You went and did it.
Yep, it's fantastic. And we're also going to have a panel of women who are, say, 65 or 70 or older, because of the dramatic changes that have happened with women in birding over the decades. Debbie Shearwater, who many of you know, tells a story that when she moved to Texas as an Army wife, and Debbie's 73 now, she was not allowed to join Audubon clubs because she was a woman. So it is, and by the way, not being a woman and not being a black man, I'm not suggesting that I understand those things. So for anybody out there who's going to say, who the hell are you to talk about these? I'm lucky enough to have access to these people and bring them together and discuss it. I'm not pretending that this is my area of expertise, but I want to learn about it. And what better way to learn about what women who are now 70 have gone through over the decades? They talk about some of the work that they did that then was stolen by their white male bosses, or some of the things that you or Scott or Drew have gone through. And it's not the focus of the show, but it's an important component of the world. And so we're going to discuss that, and I'm excited. Now, what we are going to do today with Chris is we're going to close up. I've asked Chris to select a book other than his, which I do hope that you guys get, but a book that Chris is going to recommend for the audience that he thinks would be of value for them to read.
And my recommendation is A World on the Wing by Scott Wiedensong. Really wonderful exploration of migration and some of the issues in conservation that arise because birds are so mobile. Because, we can protect them on their nesting grounds, but what about their wintering grounds? What about the habitats in between? And he really delves into some of the research in a very accessible way. He talks about some of the research that has gone on to tell, so that we learn more about migration and how we can protect the birds in their travels. So it was a great book, easy read, and his passion comes through. So I highly recommend it.
Well, and it is a great book. I'm looking at it now on my shelf. I loved it when I read it, and I will reread it. My little shameless pitch: Scott is also a guest in Why We Love Birds, and his is an exciting chapter, so we'll have some fun with that. I'm throwing the email up on the screen now. If any of you have any follow-up questions, please send them to me. And if you have questions for Chris, I will try to forward them to him. And we'd love to hear from you. If you get a chance to subscribe, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you get a chance to subscribe or to like it or to leave comments, it just helps. We spread the word. Chris talked about, the more people that learn about these issues, or the more people that learn about birding, just the better off the world is, the more time we spend outside. And so I encourage you to do that. If you want to stay on board, I do field notes at the end of every podcast. Chris, I don't know if you're aware of it, but I do a 7 to 10 minute segment. I pick one thing and throw it up there and talk about it for a little bit and have some fun doing that. It's just me babbling on about whatever the subject is. I recorded one this morning on James Bond and Ian Fleming, and that was kind of fun. And then on one on crested caracaras. And I had shared this with Chris when it happened over the weekend. I saw 42 crested caracaras at one time this weekend in Texas. And I contacted a couple of people, Chris being one and Greg Miller being another, and said, guys, can you believe I saw this? And no one else had seen it. I mean, it was an amazing thing. I don't take credit for anything other than being there and seeing it, but those are the kind of things that are really cool. And so there'll be another field notes that follows this conversation with Chris. And as I wrap up every show in the same way, get outside, enjoy nature, stay safe, and stay curious. Chris, thank you so much, man. This has been just a great conversation, and I'm already looking forward to our panel when that comes up.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Field Notes. Thanks so much for joining us. Always appreciative when you do. Field Notes is the little few-minute segment that I tag on to the end of each of our regular podcasts. It gives me a chance to dive into a single subject, no guest, just me chatting away a little bit. Normally it's about a bird or an animal or a park, or it could be something different. And today is an or. And I want you to think 007. Think James Bond. When you think of James Bond, do you automatically think of birds? I'm going to guess not. I'm going to guess you don't. But the gentleman who wrote all of the James Bond novels, the novels that have been turned into the tremendously successful series of movies. By the way, we could do a whole podcast on who plays the best James Bond, but the answer is Sean Connery. Anyway, that being said, Ian Fleming was the author who wrote all of those. He lived in Jamaica. His home was called Goldeneye. That had to do with his time as a spy, which he was in his previous life before he was a writer. And that was one of the projects that he worked on. He kept that name and named his home in Jamaica after that. He would come down every winter and write his novels, one novel a year. That was the way that he did things, which is just kind of neat. I mean, it's a cool way to do it, to just know that your life is planned that way. What a lot of people don't know about Ian Fleming is he was a passionate birder. just absolutely loved birds, especially the West Indies birds. Some of his favorites, and I'm going to read the list here: trogons, hummingbirds, toadies, parrots. Those were some of them. And when he started to write his first James Bond book, he wanted his agent to have a name that, as he said, as ordinary as possible. And he looked up in his shelves, as I'm looking up into mine right now, and he saw a book up there in his study, and it was Birds of the West Indies. And James Bond was the author of that field guide, which was his go-to field guide when he was down there, which is really neat. Now, it was a 1936 book written. James Bond, the original, was an American ornithologist. And it's an interesting way to look at it now, because he picked the name because he thought it was so extremely ordinary and wouldn't stand out, which is what he was looking for in his agent's name. Now, of course, that Bond name, the James Bond name, conjures up all kinds of things: martinis and all of those things, beautiful women and suits and cars and action and everything that goes along with 007. So it just strikes me as a little bit inconsistent that the name that was originally picked, because frankly it was boring, has now come to represent um, masculinity and all of those things. And it's a really fun deal. The real James Bond, the ornithologist, lived from 1900 to 1989, and as it is understood by people who interviewed him or by his wife, he seemed to enjoy the notoriety. And later in his life, he did get a chance to meet Ian Fleming. And Fleming said, and I want to quote this: "I'm sorry, James, you're going to have to live with this for the rest of your life." Fleming did offer his name up, however, if Bond, the real Bond, found a bird that was, as he put it, a horrible species of bird, and then he could name that after him as a way of balancing the books. James Bond's wife, Mary Wickman Bond, wrote a book in 1966 titled How 007 Got His Name. And that's kind of cool if you think about it. And ornithology was a part of his books. Ian Fleming put birds in his books, and I'm going to read some of those birds: frigate birds, roseate terns, pelicans, ibis, bananaquits, osprey, herons, swallows, hornbills, cranes. In the 2002 movie that Pierce Brosnan starred in, not a bad Bond, by the way, Die Another Day, he posed as an ornithologist. And actually, at one point in the movie, he is leafing through the actual book that the real life James Bond wrote. So I just thought that was an awful lot of fun. I had a friend call and share that with me, that they had learned that. I did not know it until I was told, and then did a little bit of research. And I hope you've enjoyed this story. A nice quick one today on James Bond. I'll throw my email up if you've got any questions or corrections. If I made some mistakes, send me an email. I'm happy to answer. If you haven't yet, please subscribe or hit like or even comment. Those things are all valuable. The more views we get, the more people we reach, the more we can share our story about the wonder of nature. Sometimes it's silly stuff like this, but sometimes it's pretty serious. And I'd like as many people as possible to see it. It attracts more guests to the show. It's an all-around great thing. So thank you for joining me for Field Notes. And as I like to wrap up every show, man, I encourage you strongly to stay safe and stay curious. Have a terrific day. Thanks for joining me.